someone got a busy signal or was not able to get through. So then we brought up the core PBX. We brought up a few internal users, beta users, pilot guys. They used that for a little while, and then they literally started rolling people over en masse, and that was phase 2. Phase 3 was the training and the sort of the project management on the call center aspect of things, because the PBX actually was the easy part, moving the people who work in the offices over, getting their voicemails taken care of. There really wasn't all that much going on there with respect to IVRs, ACD, ring groups, things like that. So when you're rolling out an enterprise contact center like this, there really is a lot of training, especially when you have an in-house development group that does the web application that wants to do a screen pop and integrate with the contact center application. But just to get the supervisors up to speed on how to use the quality tools, how to keep track of the productivity metrics and things like that. So it's a several-week process, different phases for administrators, different phases for supervisors, pretty limited session for agents on just how to navigate things and so forth. And then we obviously do some training ourselves for the internal IT folks on pre-PBX and things like that. Phase 4 was actually taking the infrastructure, which was then live, and moving people over. So we started with the order-taking group, then we moved over to customer service, and obviously during this process, as we moved on, we compared notes, figured out what worked, what didn't. So as we moved more and more people, we sort of expanded, starting with a smaller group, moving out, so we had everybody moved over, and that allowed us to change the sort of the setup and phase the Avaya out completely. So then we obviously move into a post-deployment support model where our guys are more available for questions, answers, tuning, tweaking, and whatnot, and less on site to supervise the actual transition and such. So any project has its challenges, so I'll talk about those a little bit. We all have our experience with carriers. Who here has ever dealt with NFAS on circuits? Anybody? Yep. So I know this was popular a long time ago. I can never really get my head around why people still deploy circuits this way. But basically, we had 3 different carriers bring in PRIs, one of which brought in a whole bunch over DS3 and had a multiplexer and brought them out. That was actually the first carrier we dealt with, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So seemingly, that would have been the easiest one because they were all built as standalone PRIs. And the other 2 carriers had a shared D channel that existed on 1 or 2 of the PRIs in the trunk group. So theoretically, you pick up 1 extra channel on the other PRIs. I guess that's the most efficient way to do it, but basically that means you can't plug them all into different Asterisk servers now because the timing just doesn't work. There is a timing cable you can get to put between the Digium cards if you want to put them all on the same server, but that wasn't the design here. So for carrier number 2 and 3, we just had them rebuild their circuits. And because the outsourcers were available and there were other carriers in the mix, it was actually very easy to make sure that there was no downtime while these reprovisioning events happened. So we did 1 carrier, we did the other carrier, and then we were able to move ahead there. But basically the first phase was front-ending the Avaya, and carrier number 1 that didn't have the NFAS setup was the one that provided the DID service coming into the administrative users. So we started by front-ending the Avaya switch. So we brought in the PSTN connectivity, built out some internal loopback or crossover cables rather to the Avaya, brought up the simulated PSTN circuits. That went real well. Took a few minutes, as you might expect. But when we plugged the circuits that had been live in production in the Avaya infrastructure over onto Asterisk, we had some issues. So basically the D channels would just bounce every 60 seconds. So, it looks like things are coming up, everything seems like it's pretty happy, and then boom, all the calls drop. So we didn't get too far into the testing process that night before we had to pull the plug, and we started working with the carrier. I'm sure you guys have probably dealt with some carriers recently that have not got their act together. This particular carrier, I won't name names, but they really took the cake on this one. It took 3 weeks. We had to work with them over the 4th of July holiday. They would dispatch people, it was confusing because the customer actually has an OC12 coming into the building with Verizon. So it's all fiber. And every time they talk about the local loop, everyone gets confused. They're always sending texts out, and they're like, oh, whose box is that? Is this mine? Is this yours? Anyhow, the problem ended up being a carrier-managed DS3 multiplexer that was in the building. And the carrier thought that the customer had set it up, but eventually, after digging and digging, the one guy who really knew what he was doing at the carrier got in there and said, I would never have set it up this way. 5 minutes later, the thing's fixed. We're good. Circuits are stable. So we moved on with our lives. But that was painful. And it's always good when it's not Asterisk, because every carrier under the sun is like, what platform are you using? Oh, Asterisk. Well, that must be the problem. So anyhow, phase 2 was a little easier. So after we had ironed that out, the other carriers just came up without a blink, so that was good. We had a coordinated Asterisk and Avaya transition plan so that there was an in-house guy who knew his stuff on the Avaya and could reprogram extensions or groups of extensions to flow back over to the Asterisk. So let's say you're still a legacy guy, you got one of these phones and you're hanging out until the end of the deployment, and you want to dial somebody who's been moved off the Avaya over to Asterisk. Now you got to have the Avaya know, okay, that extension no longer exists here, so I'm not going to ring that port that's not plugged in anymore. I'm going to actually send that call over to Asterisk. So they would do those changes. The other guys would light up the extensions in Asterisk, so everything would flow pretty gracefully. And so gracefully that the customer actually took the lead in moving a lot of the little groups of people, the users that needed extra hand-holding. So it ended up being a very graceful process, probably the easiest transition we've ever had, moving people from one platform to another, at least on the administrative side. Now, there was an attempt to save some dollars to recycle some Avaya IP handsets that they had. There was a SIP firmware, so we said, okay, we've never done it, but we'll give it a crack. Didn't work out so well. Seemed like it worked pretty well, but they had about 5 or so users on for a week, and the message waiting lamps would stop working. The phones would just stop registering after an hour, and it's just, there's no way to get support on it. So at that point, they said, well, there's actually a pretty good market for these phones on eBay, and for $5 more, we'll just get the Polycoms in. That was a good move, so that made things a lot easier. Phase 3 was like I said, the training and the application integration work. So this is where we started developing the PHP call map with the Flash app so that we can visualize the call flows. We actually developed something for distribution of the channel spy using the Asterisk Manager API. So you can bring up a single web interface and see all the calls that are flowing out to outsourcers. This not only was recording a big deal, but being able to dip in and listen live to what's going on in real time was very important as well. So if a particular outsourcer has a bad group of agents working a shift, maybe they're not doing a good job selling or whatever, they can dial in using that BlackBerry application and immediately tone down the percentage of calls that are flowing to that particular outsourcer. So it really helps them manage things in real time. But in any case, the channel spy thing allows them to go in with the web interface, click on the channel they want to manage, regardless of which PBX it happens to be going through at the time, and ring their station at their desk and actually dip into that call. So that's a pretty easy application to put together. As I said, the call center cutover was pretty good because we did it in different phases. We had to develop a little macro in Asterisk to actually extract the prompts off the Avaya system rather than have someone re-record it, because there was just so many different holiday announcements, different product hotlines, and different things like that. I think in the end there might have been like 60 prompts or something like that. So it was like 4 lines of dial plan code. We had a little call spool file that would just dial the Avaya extension, listen to the recording, record it on the Asterisk, and hang up. So in about half an hour, I think we had every WAV file, every GSM file we needed, moved those into the free PBX interface, and they were good to go. We coordinated the cutover with the outsourcers. So when we were taking the sales group and the customer service group, we made sure that calls could still flow and that we had coverage in the event that anything went wrong. But we had pretty good luck there. We had one other script thing that we had to do because the customer really liked the manageability of free PBX for the IVRs, time conditions, and things like that. So we had a little post-reload script that actually pushes out the time conditions, the IVRs, and one other file, I forget which one it is, so that they can actually run the IVRs through the edge server. So even though you're managing FreePBX on the core system, it actually pushes out these files to all the Astra servers in the cluster so that they can handle calls intelligently and route them where they need to go, and they don't have to do any coordinated stuff. Basically, the whole design is N+1. So even though there's 3 or 4 edge servers right now, the plan is you can add any number of those that you need, especially virtualized now that the customer is moving towards SIP infrastructure and away from the old TDM circuits. So the original design called for physical connectivity, but now it's much more graceful and it's easy to leverage that VMware platform, which works out really well. So the results. We're about a year out of this. Good feedback. We got a pretty strong case study. Just new features that they didn't have before was the visibility over these agents, getting a better perspective on how things are moving through the system, especially with respect to the outsourcers. That's not something that they had a lot of capability of recording or doing live tracking on in the past. And then the screen and audio recording for going back and seeing what happened with the situation, whether there's coaching or training needed with particular people. Just being able to take a good call sample and play it back to a group of trainees so they can better, kind of hear how they should be doing things was something that wasn't available before. And the other thing about the screen recording that was kind of surprising was they were able to find problems with their web application in a way that they couldn't before. So, they've got this in-house app that they do their order taking on. They'd get a problem report in the past, and they'd say, oh, we clicked here, this happened, and they would have a developer work for hours or a day to just try to reproduce the bug. Now they can pull up the screen recording and literally play it back and watch what happened to the agent and say, oh, well, there you go. So that was an unexpected takeaway. But just from an ROI perspective, this is a project that saved the customer money and made them more money in the end. Because right away, you're able to do some things with the Presence Agent toolbar that you couldn't do in the past, one of which was the auto answer. And that's kind of obvious. You could do that in other ways. But being able to qualify the call quickly and see what the agent was doing with wrap-up and so forth, they were able to actually calculate that they shortened their call times by 14 to 18 seconds per call. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're taking 15,000 calls a day at your peak, you're talking more than 40 man-hours per day. So just from a dollars perspective, it adds up pretty quickly. They were able to reduce fraud because of these recordings and things that they were able to pull back and see what happened. So customers that would call in and claim to have ordered something and didn't get it and wanted a refund, well, that's not what you ordered, things like that. And then just be able to hold their outsourcers to a higher degree of accountability. They actually replaced one of their call center partners because the quality, after they started looking at recordings and monitoring the situation over time, wasn't as good as they thought it was. So when the outsourcers are making mistakes or if things are not going well, they actually adjust the way that the agents work the program. So they have like an upsell that they'll do at the end of a call. So if the call volume is low, things are quiet, they can keep a customer on the phone longer and they can say, oh, we see you ordered a few things. We'll give you a discount if you want to order something else. And they'll try to talk them into something. And that works out well, adds more, to the top line. But the bottom line is when call volume is high, you got to cut that stuff down a little bit because you're turning away more business than you're creating, with that upsell attempt. So they monitor that carefully, and that's actually resulted in a pretty good ROI just by itself. And then, obviously we're dealing with Avaya versus Asterisk and Presence, so the cost of maintenance is just, a fraction of what it would otherwise be. So some pretty good quotes. As I said, the one surprising result that the IT department found was the ability to debug the internal applications by leveraging these screen playbacks and things like that. So that was a pretty good outcome and something that's actually cut down their development costs and help them work more effectively over time. And some really good feedback from the call center operations people. The supervisor reporting, the screen playback tools, all the things that Presence brings to the supervisor's tool set is really good relative to other platforms in that space. So we had some really terrific feedback from the call center manager himself, who said, 13 years.